She stood trembling in the dust, a frail figure beneath the blazing western sun. Her dress, once white, was now the color of the road, torn, faded, and tired. The murmurs of the crowd surrounded her like a swarm of flies, cruel and careless. "She's barren," one man muttered, spitting in the dirt. "Her dollar's too much for that." Another laughed, the sound sharp as a whip. She didn't lift her head. Shame had taught her to stare at the ground. Then through the noise her voice cracked the silence, weak, trembling yet heavy with truth. "I'm infertile." "By me? What for?" The words hung in the hot air, awkward and painful. No one answered. Men shuffled their boots, looking away, unwilling to meet her eyes. To them, a woman who couldn't bear children had no value, not as a wife, not even as a servant. But one man at the edge of the crowd didn't turn away. He was tall, weather-worn, with eyes that had seen both death and dawn. A rancher, the kind who worked more with silence than words. He stepped forward slowly, pulling a single silver dollar from his pocket. The coin glinted in the sunlight as he said, almost in a whisper, "For hope." The crowd quieted, their laughter fading into confusion. He wasn't buying her beauty, she had none left. He wasn't buying her strength, it had been stolen by hunger. He was buying something unseen, something that no one else there believed in. Any more hope. He placed the dollar on the table, took her trembling hand and led her away. She didn't understand why. The wagon creaked down the dirt road, wheels stirring up clouds of gold dust. She sat in silence beside him, afraid to speak, afraid it might all disappear if she did. At sunset they stopped by a lonely ranch house. Far from the noise of men who measured worth in dollars, he helped her down gently, his hands rough but kind. "You'll eat," he said, handing her a plate of warm bread. "You'll rest. You don't owe me anything." The words struck her harder than cruelty ever had. No man had ever given her kindness without demand. That night, as the wind whispered through the dry grass, she lay awake under a real roof for the first time in years, and for reasons she couldn't name. She wept, not from pain, but from the strange, fragile feeling that maybe she'd just been given a new beginning. The morning came soft and golden, spilling across the plains and painting the ranch in gentle light. She woke to the smell of coffee and the sound of boots on wooden floors. For a moment, she forgot where she was, then remembered the dollar, the man, the silence that wasn't cruel. The rancher was already outside, mending a fence, his shirt damp with sweat and effort. She watched him from the porch, unsure if she should speak. When he noticed her, he simply nodded and said, "Mornin'. There's water by the well. Take what you need." No command, no suspicion. Just simple words that felt like mercy. Days passed, and she began to move like a ghost around the ranch, sweeping, cooking, tending to chores she remembered from a different life. Each evening he'd thank her quietly, eating whatever she managed to make, never complaining even when the bread was burnt or the stew was thin. She tried to understand him. Men she'd known before used kindness as bait, but this man, he never reached for her, never looked at her body with hunger. Only at her eyes when she spoke, as if trying to see the person beneath the ruin. One afternoon, a storm rolled in suddenly, dark and violent. The wind howled through the valley, rattling the shutters. As she rushed to secure them, a sharp crack of thunder startled her. The rancher appeared beside her, helping to latch the windows. Their hands brushed and she froze. His touch was steady, warm, grounding, real. For a heartbeat, she wanted to stay there. Wanted to believe in something beyond survival. But she pulled away, retreating into the corner like a frightened bird. He didn't chase her, didn't speak. He only said, "You're safe here," before walking back into the rain. That night she couldn't sleep. The sound of rain on the roof carried her back to the times when she'd prayed for death. But here the sound was different, softer, like the earth itself was trying to wash her clean. She thought about his hands, his quiet patience, and the way he looked at her as though she still mattered. Something inside her, long buried, began to stir. Not desire, not yet, but something older and deeper, the will to live. When dawn came again, she found herself humming while making breakfast. The rancher paused by the door, listening. She blushed, embarrassed, but he smiled, a slow, honest smile that reached his eyes. And in that moment, she realized the dollar he'd spent wasn't the start of ownership. It was the beginning of healing. Weeks turned into months, and the land began to bloom again after the rains. She found comfort in the rhythm of the ranch, the sound of cattle, the creak of fences, the smell of earth after sunrise. Every morning he'd ride out early, leaving a mug of coffee for her on the porch. Every evening he'd return with dust on his boots and a quiet smile. Their words were few, but their silence spoke volumes. Slowly, without either of them noticing, loneliness gave way to something gentler, a bond born of shared peace. One day the rancher brought a doctor to tend to a sick mare. The doctor, noticing her frail frame, asked gently if she was well. She hesitated, then whispered her secret, that she was infertile, that no man wanted her. The doctor frowned, confused. After a quiet examination, he said softly, "You're not infertile. You were starving, mistreated. Your body shut down to survive. You can heal." She stared at him, stunned. The rancher's eyes widened, a light breaking across his weathered face. "You hear that?" he said, his voice trembling with something like joy. "You're not broken." She didn't know how to respond. Years of shame, of being told she was worthless, melted beneath the weight of his words. Tears spilled down her cheeks, and before she could speak, he stepped forward, pulling her into his arms. "You don't need to prove anything," he murmured. "You're enough. You always were." She wept into his chest as the wind whispered through the fields, carrying away everything that had once chained her heart. Time passed, and healing became her quiet miracle. Her cheeks grew full again. Her laughter returned, and sometimes, when the evening light turned golden, she'd catch him watching her, not with pity, but with love. Then one morning she felt it, a flutter, a spark of life inside her belly. She stood frozen, hands trembling over her heart. When she told him, his knees gave way. He laughed, cried, and kissed her hands like they were sacred. $1, he whispered, and look what it brought. Months later, beneath a crimson sky, she gave birth to a daughter. The rancher held them both, tears streaking his sunburned face. She looked up at him and said softly, "You didn't buy me. You gave me back my life," he smiled, his voice breaking. "No," he said, "you taught me what love really costs, and what it's worth." The wind carried their laughter across the wide, forgiving plains. The seasons rolled on, and the ranch became a place of laughter instead of silence. The woman who once stood trembling in the dust now walked the fields with her daughter on her hip, her face glowing with a peace she'd never known. The rancher watched them from the corral, the same silver dollar still hanging on a string above the doorway, a reminder of how something so small could change everything. Neighbors whispered about the miracle child, but he only smiled and said it wasn't a miracle, it was kindness. Every evening they'd sit together by the porch as the sky burned orange and gold. She'd hum lullabies in a language from long ago, and he'd close his eyes, letting her voice carry him to a place beyond words. Sometimes she'd glance at him and see the same softness in his gaze that she'd seen the day he first reached for her hand. It wasn't pity then, and it wasn't pity now. It was love, steady and unspoken, the kind that grows deeper with time. Years passed, and the child grew strong, running barefoot through the tall grass, her laughter echoing across the hills. The woman often told her, "You were born from hope, not from money." The little girl would giggle, not fully understanding, but the rancher's eyes would glisten every time he heard it. He never forgot how it began, not with desire, not with a bargain, but with a simple act of compassion that turned two broken lives into one family. When storms came, they faced them together. When droughts hit, they endured with quiet faith. And in every hardship, she reminded him that the same soil that once held their pain now grew their future. At night, they'd lie beneath the stars, hands intertwined, hearts steady. She'd whisper, "I still don't know why you chose me." He'd smile, tracing her cheek with his rough thumb, "Because you were the only one brave enough to ask, and I was the only fool brave enough to answer." By the time the years had painted silver in their hair, their story had spread across the frontier, the tale of the rancher who bought hope for $1 and found love that could never be sold. And when their daughter was grown, she kept that silver coin close to her heart, telling her own children, "This is how my parents taught me what life really costs, not in gold or land, but in kindness that never asks for return."